Some men spend their whole lives running from the past. Marcus Wellstone had stopped running 15 years ago, but he'd never stopped looking over his shoulder. That's what the past does. It doesn't chase you. It just waits patient and inevitable for the moment when the present looks enough like what came before that you can't tell the difference anymore. July in Dust Haven in Nevada was the kind of heat that didn't ask permission. It pressed down on everything with the full weight of summer, turning the cracked asphalt into something close to molten, making the air shimmer in waves that bent light and stretched distances. The old Dusty Mile gas station sat at the edge of town like a forgotten promise, its faded sign creaking in the occasional hot breath of wind that passed for breeze out here. Marcus Wellstone, though, everyone who knew him called him Tank, and had for 12 years now had his hands wrapped around a chrome socket wrench, working a stubborn bolt on the rear wheel of his Road King, like it had personally insulted his entire bloodline. Sweat rolled down the back of his neck in steady rivulets, soaking into the collar of his black t-shirt. The leather vest his colors, the patches that meant everything and nothing depending on who was looking, hung on the handlebar grip nearby, too hot to wear in this furnace of an afternoon. At 34, Tank had the kind of face that had seen things and decided to keep most of them to herself. Square jaw, dark eyes that tracked movement with the practiced awareness of someone who'd learned early that not paying attention could cost you, and a scar along his left temple that he'd gotten in Columbus, Ohio, when he was 19 and stupid and thought loyalty to the wrong people was the same thing as strength. He'd learned better, the hard way, the only way that sticks. 3 feet away, James Keller Cutter, to everyone who'd earned the right to call him that, was crouched beside his softail, a rag soaked in degreaser hanging from his back pocket. Cutter was 37 and built like someone who had spent time in a different life doing physical labor that had nothing to do with motorcycles. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, old marks that told stories he didn't share, and his face had the weathered quality of a man who'd spent years squinting into sun and wind and whatever else the road threw at him. Cutter didn't talk much, never had. He was the kind of quiet that wasn't about being shy or uncertain. It was the quiet of someone who learned that most of what people said didn't need saying, and the things that did need saying were better delivered with weight and intention. He spoke when he had something worth the breath. Most days the world didn't offer much. Ridge Thomas Ridge, though. Nobody had called him Thomas in so long, even his driver's license felt like it was lying, was sitting on an upturned milk crate near the air pump, smoking a cigarette, and scrolling through nothing important on his phone. At 32, Ridge was the youngest of the 3, lean and wiry, with the kind of restless energy that made him good at noticing things other people missed. He had pale eyes that caught light in a way that made him look like he was always calculating something just behind them, which he usually was. The gas station belonged to old Pete technically, though Pete hadn't questioned why 3 members of the Dust Haven Angels chose his lot for their weekly maintenance ritual. He kept the vending machine stocked with cold Gatorade and stayed inside his office with the AC cranked and the door closed, and everyone benefited from the arrangement. The Angels got space to work without being hassled. Pete got the kind of reputation that meant nobody messed with his pumps or his register. Mutual understanding, the kind that works fine until it doesn't. It was 2:47 in the afternoon when the brush moved. Not the wind. There wasn't any wind that day. The air was as flat and dead as week-old roadkill hanging heavy and still, like something waiting to break. But something in the scrub brush along the eastern edge of the lot shifted a snap of dry branch, a rustle of creosote bush, the particular sound of weight moving through space where no weight should be. Ridge heard it first. He looked up from his phone without lifting his head, that small, economical movement of someone who'd trained himself to notice without announcing that he'd noticed. "Hey," he said quietly. Just that one word, but the tone carried. Tank didn't look up right away. What? Brush moved. It's the desert ridge. Things move. Not like that. Cutter stood up slowly, the degreaser rag still in his hand, his eyes already tracking to the same spot. Ridge was watching a patch of creosote and dead scrub, maybe 20 feet from the edge of the lot where the asphalt gave way to hard-packed dirt, and the desert started its long, patient sprawl toward distant mountains. For a moment, nothing. Just the three of them standing in the heat, listening to the specific kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. And then she fell out of it. She didn't walk out, didn't step carefully through the brush. She stumbled forward on legs that barely remembered how to work one small hand, catching the chain link fence at the edge of the lot before her knees gave out completely. She was maybe 8 years old, maybe 9. Hard to tell because she was folded in on herself, collapsed inward in the way children do when the pain is too big to hold upright, when the body tries to make itself smaller, because small feels safer even when it isn't. Her left arm was hanging wrong, not just limp wrong, angle wrong, the kind of wrong that doesn't happen by accident. The forearm below the elbow had a bend to it that arms don't have on their own, not without help, not without the specific kind of force that requires intention. Her face was a map of damage, a cut above her left eyebrow, still seeping blood in a slow dark line down toward her cheekbone. A bruise spreading up the left side of her jaw like spilled ink in water purple-black at the center, and fading to sick yellow-green at the edges. Her shirt, some kind of pink thing with cartoon characters that Tank didn't recognize, was torn at the collar, hanging loose on one side. One shoe was missing, just one. The other foot still had a white sneaker with pink laces, scuffed and dirty. She looked at the three men staring at her, and for one terrible second, that seemed to stretch into something much longer. She almost turned around and ran back into the brush, back toward whatever she'd run from. Because whatever that was, it was known. And these three men, big tattooed, wearing leather in the middle of a heat that would kill most people standing in front of motorcycles that looked like they could eat miles without stopping, were unknown. Tank moved first. He set down the wrench, not dropped it, set it down, slowly, carefully. The way you move when you don't want to startle an animal that's already been hurt, when you understand that sudden movement is the enemy of trust. He crossed the lot in 6 long strides and dropped to one knee in front of her, putting himself at her level, making himself smaller. When he spoke, his voice came out of somewhere different than the voice he used with his brothers. Somewhere softer, somewhere that remembered being 19 and watching his mother sit at a kitchen table with a split lip and blackened eye, too afraid to go to the hospital, because the man who'd put her there had connections and she had nothing. "Hey," he said. "Hey, easy, nobody here's going to hurt you." She flinched anyway. Old habit, deep habit, the kind of flinch that comes from the body, not the brain, because the brain can be convinced, but the body remembers. "What's your name?" She stared at him, at his vest hanging on the motorcycle behind him, at the ink running up both his arms, tribal patterns, and one piece on his right forearm that said Semper in script, though the fidelis that should have followed it had never been added. She was doing the math every scared kid does when they meet someone bigger and stronger, weighing what she could see against how much pain she was already in. "Harper," she finally whispered, barely audible, a breath with shape. "Harper." Tank said it like it meant something, like he was storing it somewhere important. "Okay, Harper, I need you to look at me for a second. Can you do that?" She met his eyes. Hers were brown, dark brown, almost black, and wet with tears that hadn't fallen yet, but were building behind the dam of whatever strength she had left. "Who did this to you?" The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. To Tank, it felt like an hour. Harper's bottom lip trembled. Her good hand gripped the chain link fence harder, knuckles going white. And then something broke loose in her face, not the tears, those were already there, but something deeper. Something that had been locked up tight under layers of fear and warning, and the specific kind of quiet that children learn to keep when telling the truth costs more than they can afford. Some boys, she said, older boys. How many? I don't know. 3, I think. She swallowed hard, her throat working. They said if I told anyone. She stopped. Her eyes dropped to the ground. Harper. Tank's voice stayed low, steady, like a hand on a shaking shoulder. If you told anyone what? She looked up at him, and what was in her eyes was the worst thing Tank had seen in years. And Tank had seen things. Things he couldn't unsee, things that lived in the back of his head and came out at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. They said they'd hurt my mama. Behind him, Tank heard Cutter turn away. It was a small movement, barely a step, but Ridge caught it and said nothing because he understood it. Cutter had a daughter, Lily, 6 years old, living in Reno with her mother, who decided 3 years ago that James Keller's lifestyle wasn't compatible with raising a child in a safe environment. Cutter didn't see Lily as often as he should, didn't see her as often as he wanted to, but he thought about her every single day. Every single day. And what he was feeling right now in the pit of his stomach, watching this small broken girl with her arm hanging wrong that had a name, and the name was unbearable. Ridge threw a cigarette on the ground and crushed it under his boot. His jaw was doing something tight and controlled the muscle jumping beneath the skin. The kind of expression that meant he was working very hard not to show what his face wanted to show, because showing it wouldn't help Harper and might scare her, and scaring her more than she already was seemed like the worst possible thing a person could do. Tank kept his eyes on Harper. Those boys, he said carefully, they anywhere near here right now? She shook her head. Small movements like her neck hurt. I ran a long time. Okay, that was smart. You're smart. He reached out very slowly, telegraphing the movement, and let his hand rest on top of hers where it gripped the fence. He didn't squeeze, didn't apply pressure. Just let it be there, warm and solid and still. Your mama, he said. Where is she? She works at the diner, the one with the blue sign on Route 9. Aaron's place. Harper blinked. You know it. I know where it is. He paused. Is your mama's name Aaron? Yes. Tank stood up slowly, his knees creaking in a way that reminded him he wasn't 20 anymore. And when he turned to look at Cutter and Ridge, whatever was on his face made both men straighten up without being told to. Get the truck, Tank said to Ridge. Ridge was already moving. They didn't take the bikes. That was the first decision, and it was the right one. Harper needed to be in something enclosed, something with a door she could shut, something that wouldn't make her feel exposed to the open air, and everything the open air might be hiding. She needed walls, even temporary ones, even ones made of metal and glass that could be broken but felt solid enough to matter. Ridge pulled the old F2 Fivavios around from behind the station. Old Pete's truck, borrowed without discussion, which Pete would allow because he'd seen enough of the world to know when borrowed was the right word and when it wasn't. The truck was sun-faded blue, 20 years old, with a bench seat in front and a crew cab in back that could fit 4 people if 2 of them didn't mind being close. Cutter climbed into the back seat first and slid to the far side, putting himself where Harper could see him, but giving her space. Tank lifted Harper into the cab as gently as he'd ever lifted anything in his life, supporting her back with one hand and keeping her broken arms stable with the other. She made a sound when her arms shifted, so involuntary, barely a syllable, and Tank's teeth came together behind closed lips. We're going to get that looked at, he told her. There's a clinic on Miller Road. Dr. Vance. She's good people. Harper was sitting very straight in the middle of the bench seat, her broken arm cradled against her stomach with her good one, holding it like it might fall off if she let go. She looked at Tank climbing into the passenger seat, then at Cutter beside her and back. then at Ridge behind the wheel. Her eyes were doing that math again, calculating, weighing. "You're the bikers," she said quietly. "People in town say you're scary." Nobody said anything for a moment. Ridge had his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Cutter was looking out the side window at nothing in particular. Tank turned in his seat to look at Harper directly. "People in town are right," Cutter said before Tank could answer, which was unusual. Cutter speaking up, volunteering words. "We are scary." He paused, and when he looked at Harper, his face had something in it that Tank had rarely seen there. Something soft and fierce at the same time. "But not to you," Cutter said. Harper looked at him for a long moment, and then she turned back to face forward, settling into the seat, and she didn't lean away from Cutter anymore. Didn't press herself against the door. She just sat holding her arm and let herself be small in the space between two men who were choosing to be careful with that smallness. Ridge put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the road. The clinic on Miller Road was a flat-roofed building with a hand-painted sign that said Dust Haven Medical Walk-ins, welcome in fading blue letters. The parking lot held 6 cars on a good day. Today, there were 3. Ridge pulled into a spot near the entrance and killed the engine, and for a second they all just sat there listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of the clinic's AC unit. Tank opened his door. "Come on." Dr. Vance was inside finishing paperwork at the front desk when the door opened and Tank walked in ahead of a small, damaged girl flanked by 2 men who took up most of the available doorway. Dr. Vance was 61 years old, had worked the clinic for 23 years, and liked to say she could no longer be surprised by what walked through her door. She looked at Harper's arm. She looked at the bruising on Harper's face. She looked at the way the girl was holding herself protective, defensive, like she expected another blow. And Dr. Vance said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Tank. "How did this happen?" "That's what we're trying to find out," Tank said. Dr. Vance's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press. Not yet. She'd been in Dust Haven long enough to recognize the Angels, long enough to know their reputation, and long enough to have seen Tank bring in 2 other people over the years, a woman with a dislocated shoulder who wouldn't say how it happened, and a teenager with burns on his hands who claimed it was an accident with a camp stove. Both times Tank had waited in the lobby while Dr. Vance worked, and both times he'd paid cash and asked no questions when she filed the mandatory reports. She led Harper into the exam room. Tank moved to follow, and she stopped him with a look. The kind of look that could stop traffic. "I'll get you when I'm done." She closed the door. Cutter sat down in one of the plastic chairs in the waiting area, his long frame folding into the too small seat. Ridge leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Tank stood in the middle of the room, staring at the closed door, and didn't move. His hands were at his sides, completely still. But there was something in his stillness that was the opposite of calm. It was controlled tension. Pressure held in check by will alone. The silence in that waiting room was the loudest kind. 17 minutes later, Dr. Vance came out. She left the door to the exam room cracked behind her and walked up to Tank, and when she spoke, she lowered her voice to something flat and deliberate. "That fracture is not from a fall," she said. Tank's jaw tightened. Both bones in her forearm, the angle, the placement. Dr. Vance stopped choosing her words. That arm was grabbed and snapped. Someone held her still and broke it, on purpose. The air in the room changed. Ridge's arms came uncrossed. Cutter's head came up. Tank didn't move, but something in his stillness shifted the way weather shifts right before it stops being weather and starts being something else. "She's 8 years old," Tank said. His voice was very quiet. "I know," Dr. Vance held his gaze. "I have to report it. You know I have to report it. I'm aware of your obligations. I'm also aware," Dr. Vance continued, "that the people who need to help her aren't always the ones with the authority to do it." She paused and something passed between them, an understanding that lived in the space between legal requirement and moral imperative. So I'm telling you first, whatever you do with that information is between you and whatever you answer to. She went back through the door. When Harper came out 10 minutes later, her arm was in a temporary splint, white medical padding wrapped with elastic bandages, immobilizing the break until she could get to a hospital for a proper cast. Her face had been clean. The cut above her eyebrow had a small butterfly bandage on it. She was holding a small paper cup of apple juice that Dr. Vance had given her, and she looked at the three men waiting, and for the first time since she had fallen out of the brush, something in her expression settled. Just a fraction, just a hairline shift, but it was there. She said, "My arm needs a real cast," Harper said, "at the hospital." "We'll get you there," Tank said. "But first, Harper, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer." "Okay." She nodded, serious, taking it seriously. "The boys who did this," Tank said, "do you know their names?" She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved to the cup in her hand, watching the apple juice slosh slightly with the tiny movements of her grip. "The big one told the others what to do," she said. "They called him Dale." Tank kept his face still. "Dale have a last name?" "I don't know his last name." She stopped, took a small sip of juice. "But he told me his brother was coming, that his brother makes the rules, and that if I ran to anybody, his brother would know." "What did he say his brother's name was?" Harper looked up. "He said his name was Raymond," she said. "He said Raymond doesn't forgive people who talk." The name didn't mean anything to Tank in that exact moment. It would later. It would mean a great deal later. But right now it was just a name, and the name could wait, because what could not wait was Harper's mother. Aaron's place on Route 9 was 11 minutes from the clinic. Ridge made it in 8, pushing the speed in a way that wasn't reckless, but wasn't cautious either. The diner had 4 cars in the lot and a hand-lettered specials board in the window that someone had been updating with the same blue marker for what looked like years. Tank went in alone. He decided that on the drive over without explaining why, and neither Cutter nor Ridge questioned it. Sometimes one person walking through a door was information. 3 people walking through a door was a statement. This needed to be information first. The woman behind the counter looked up when he came in. Mid-30s, dark circles under her eyes, the kind of tired that didn't come from one bad night, but from 100 of them stacked on top of each other. Her name tag said Aaron in block letters, and the moment she saw Tank, his vest, his patches, his size, something moved across her face. Not surprise, recognition. And behind the recognition, terror. Not the regular kind of terror that a large stranger in a biker vest might cause in a small-town diner. The specific kind, the kind that says, "I know why you're here." Tank stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the diner, 4 tables, 2 other customers, who were both suddenly very interested in their food. And he looked at Aaron and he said very quietly, "Your daughter is safe." Aaron's hand went to her mouth. "She's in a truck outside with 2 of my people," Tank continued. "She has a broken arm that we're taking care of. She's safe, but I need you to hear that part first before I say anything else, because I think you need to hear it." Aaron's eyes were filling. She wasn't crying yet. She was holding it back with everything she had, because she was at work, because she was always at work, because work was the only thing between her and the thing she was afraid of. But the edges of her were shaking. "She ran," Aaron said. Her voice was barely a sound. "Oh God, she ran. I told her not to. If she ran, they're not going to do anything to you or your daughter," Tank said. He stepped closer to the counter, keeping his voice low, keeping it level. "I'm telling you that right now. I'm telling you that as a fact. But I need you to tell me who we're dealing with." Aaron shook her head fast, almost violent. "You don't understand. These people, they're not just some guys. They don't." "I understand more than you think," Tank said. "Your daughter mentioned a name. Raymond." Aaron went white, not pale, white. The color left her face the way sound leaves a room when something terrible happens inside it. Her hand dropped from her mouth. She looked at Tank like she was seeing something she'd been trying very hard to believe wasn't real. "You need to leave," she whispered. "You need to get in your truck and take Harper somewhere far away from here. And you need to leave, please. Please, I'm begging you." Aaron, his voice didn't rise. It just became more solid, more present. "I'm not leaving, and neither are you, not without knowing what we're walking into." He leaned forward slightly, just enough. "Who is Raymond Briggs?" The other two customers had both quietly paid and left. Even the cook had gone quiet in the back. It was just the two of them and the name between them and what the name carried. Erin put both hands flat on the counter like she needed the surface to hold herself up. "He's the worst thing that ever happened to this town," she said. "And he's been waiting for a reason to make an example of somebody." She looked up at Tank and her eyes were dry now, not because the feeling had left, but because she'd moved past feeling into something harder and more desperate. "Please don't let it be my daughter." Tank walked back to the truck in the full weight of the afternoon sun, and when he opened the driver's door and looked at Ridge across the seat and at Harper in the middle, and at Cutter with his eyes already asking the question, Tank said two words: "Briggs family." Ridge's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Cutter looked out the window. Harper looked at Tank, not understanding the words, but understanding the weight behind them perfectly. "Are the bad men gone?" she asked. Tank got in and pulled the door shut. He looked straight ahead at the highway, at the shimmer of heat rising off the asphalt, at the flat line of the desert stretching toward a horizon that didn't offer any easy answers. He thought about what Dr. Vance had said. He thought about the angle of a broken arm and what it took to make it happen that way. He thought about Raymond Briggs and the fact that Aaron's face had gone white at the sound of the name. And he thought about Harper asking, "Please don't let them find my mama," in a voice that sounded like the last of something. He looked at Harper. "Not yet," he said, "but they will be." Harper held his gaze for a moment, the apple juice cup still in her good hand, her splinted arm resting carefully in her lap. "Promise," she said. The truck pulled out onto Route 9 heading toward the hospital. Behind them, the gas station sat empty and hot in the afternoon sun, the wrench still lying on the pavement where Tank had set it down, when a small girl fell out of the brush and everything ordinary stopped being ordinary. "Yeah," Tank said, "I promise." The hospital in Clover County was 40 minutes east of Dust Haven, and every mile of that drive was quiet in the way that quiet gets when nobody inside a vehicle trusts themselves to speak. Ridge drove. Tank sat in the passenger seat with his elbow on the door and his eyes on the road, watching the desert scroll past like a film he'd seen before but couldn't quite remember the ending to. In the back of seat, Harper had fallen asleep against Cutter's arm somewhere around the 20-minute mark, her splinted arm resting across her lap, her breathing finally evening out into something that resembled peace. Cutter sat completely still. He didn't shift his position, didn't reach for his phone, didn't look at anything except the window and the unchanging landscape beyond it. He just let her sleep against him and stared out at the desert going by, and the look on his face was the kind that men like him didn't usually let anybody see. Ridge caught it in the rearview mirror once and looked away because some things you don't comment on even when you notice them. "Briggs," Ridge said finally, just above a whisper so as not to wake Harper. "You know the name." "I know of it," Tank said. "Raymond Briggs runs a crew out of the Eastern County. Word is he's not the top. He's a collector." "Collector for who?" Tank was quiet for a moment. "Haven't gotten that far yet." "Aaron knows." "Aaron's scared out of her mind." "Yeah," Ridge said, "but she knows." Tank turned that over. He knew Ridge was right. The way Aaron had gone white at the name, that wasn't the reaction of someone who'd heard rumors passed around at the diner. That was someone who'd been handed a bill she couldn't pay and had been watching the clock ever since, waiting for it to come due. "We'll talk to her again," Tank said. "After Harper's seen a doctor, after she's got a real cast on that arm and somebody's told her she's going to be okay." He paused. Then we talked to Aaron. From the back seat, Cutter spoke without looking away from the window. What did those kids do to her? To snap the bone like that? Nobody answered because the answer lived in the x-ray Dr. Vance had described in the angle and the placement in the words someone held her still and broke it, and nobody in that truck needed to say it out loud to feel the full weight of it settling into their bones like radiation. Ridge pressed the accelerator a little harder. The highway opened up ahead of them and Clover County got closer by degrees. The hospital took 2 hours. Paperwork imaging a pediatric physician named Dr. Reyes, who had kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Harper responded to almost immediately. The cast was set pale blue Harper's choice, and Dr. Reyes spoke to Tank in the hallway afterward with the kind of directness that told him she'd filed the mandatory report and that Child Protective Services would be following up, but that she'd noted in the file that the child was currently in the care of responsible adults and that the situation was being actively addressed. Tank didn't tell her what actively addressed meant exactly. She didn't ask. There was an understanding between them that lived in the space between what was legal and what was necessary, and Dr. Reyes was old enough to know that space existed. When they brought Erin back to see her daughter, Ridge had gone to get her from the diner, while Tank and Cutter stayed with Harper. The sound Erin made when she walked through the door and saw Harper sitting up on the exam table with a blue cast and a hospital bracelet and a small cup of orange jello was not quite a sob, not quite a word. It was something prior to both of those things, something that lived below language. "Mama, don't cry," Harper said. "I'm okay." Erin crossed the room in 3 steps and held her daughter as carefully and completely as she possibly could, and she was shaking and she didn't say anything for a full minute and nobody in the room moved. Tank stepped back to the doorway. Cutter followed. Ridge stayed near the window with his back to everyone, giving them the only privacy available. After a while, Erin looked up. Her eyes found Tank across the room, and they were dry now. Not because the feeling had left, but because she'd made a decision somewhere in that minute of holding her daughter. The decision was visible in her face. It looked like surrender, but it wasn't. It was the opposite. It was someone who'd been running, deciding to stop running and turn around. "I'll tell you everything," she said. Tank nodded once. "But not here," she glanced at Harper. "Not in front of her." They got Harper settled in the waiting area with Cutter, who sat beside her, and then let her tell him about her teacher at school and her cat named Biscuit, and the fact that blue was actually her second favorite color, but they didn't have purple for the kid, and that was okay. Cutter listened to all of it with complete and genuine attention, which was in its own way one of the most remarkable things that happened that entire day. Tank and Ridge took Erin to the far end of the hallway near a window that looked out at the parking lot, and she talked. Her name was Erin Lee. She was 34 years old. She'd moved to Dust Haven 3 years ago after a divorce, just her and Harper wanting somewhere quiet and cheap and far enough from Tucson that her ex-husband's orbit wouldn't reach them. She'd taken the job at the diner, found a small house on the south side, started building something small and modest, but hers. 8 months ago, she'd borrowed money. Not from a bank. Banks didn't move fast enough, and her landlord didn't care about fast. He cared about now. She'd borrowed from a man named Stills, who ran a loan operation out of a storage facility on the edge of town. Not legal, obviously, but not extraordinary either. Half the working poor in Dust Haven had borrowed from Stills at some point. She'd borrowed $4,000, and she'd been paying it back monthly on time, every payment documented on a little notebook she kept in her purse, and then still sold her debt. Tank's eyes sharpened. Sold it to who? Erin pressed her lips together. A man named Raymond Briggs came to the diner 4 months ago, sat down at the counter, ordered coffee, slid a piece of paper across to me like we were doing business. She swallowed. Said that Stills had transferred my account and that I now owed Briggs. Said the original 4,000 had accrued fees and that I owed $9,200. Ridge made a sound that was not quite a word. More than double, Tank said, very calm. He was very calm about it, Aaron said. That was the worst part. He was calm and he was smiling, and he acted like this was just how things worked. Like I should know this. Like I should have expected it. She swallowed. I told him I'd been paying Stills every month. He said that was between me and Stills. He said the number was the number. And when you couldn't pay it, Tank said he started sending his boys. Her voice dropped. Not to me at first, little things. My car had a tire slashed. A window in the house got broken. I found a note in Harper's backpack. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. In Harper's school backpack, Tank said, going very still. What did the note say? It said 9,200, tick-tock. The hallway held that for a moment. I went to the sheriff, Aaron said. Morales, he listened to me, wrote something down, said he'd look into it. She shook her head. Nothing happened. Nothing. And when I went back 2 weeks later, Morales told me, and I remember these exact words, he told me that Raymond Briggs was a businessman with ties to several legitimate operations in the county, and that without hard evidence of a crime, there wasn't much he could do. Ridge laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Morales, you know him, Aaron asked. I know the type, Ridge said. Tank was still working through it, so Briggs escalated. He sent his kids after Harper. His nephews, Aaron said. Dale and 2 younger ones. They're 17, 15, 14. And they're not just boys being bullies. They're trained. Raymond trained them. They do what he tells them because they're afraid of him and because he rewards them for it. She looked at Tank directly. Dale broke Harper's arm because Raymond told him to send a message. The weight of that sentence dropped into the hallway like something physical. Tank breathed in through his nose, breathed out slow. His hands were at his sides, completely still. And that stillness was the most controlled thing in the building. What's behind Briggs, he asked. Who does he report to? Aaron hesitated. Just half a second, but it was there and Tank caught it. Aaron, she said quietly, if I say this name, I am crossing a line I cannot uncross. You crossed it the moment your daughter's arm got broken. She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. Lennox Crowe, she said. Tank and Ridge both went still. Raymond Briggs works for a man named Lennox Crowe. Crowe runs everything in a 3-county radius. Briggs is his collection arm. She paused. Morales, as she glanced away. Morales is on Crowe's payroll, has been for years from what people say. Ridge turned and looked at Tank. Tank didn't look back at Ridge. He was looking at Aaron, and what was moving through his expression was not surprise because men like Tank operated in a world where corruption and violence had addresses and phone numbers and first and last names, but the specific focus that comes when a problem becomes fully visible. Lennox Crowe, Tank repeated. Nobody in this county goes against him, Aaron said. Nobody. The ones who tried Ridge asked, what happened to them? They left, she said, simply. Or they didn't. The hallway went quiet again. Down at the other end through the waiting room window, Tank could see Harper's blue cast moving as she talked, hands gesturing at something, and Cutter nodding along beside her with what looked from this distance and this angle almost like a smile. Okay, Tank said. He said it quietly and he said it once and it landed with the finality of a decision being made. Aaron looked at him. Okay, what? Okay, we know what we're dealing with. He turned to Ridge. Get Priest on the phone. And Daniels. Tell them we need the full picture on a Lennox Crowe Eastern Nevada operation, county-level corruption, including a sheriff named Morales. He paused. And tell them it's not a request. Ridge already had his phone out. Tank looked back at Aaron. You and Harper are not going back to that house tonight. I have work in the morning. You have a daughter with a broken arm and a cast and a message from Raymond Briggs that was delivered through her bones, Tank said. Not harshly, just plainly. You're not going back to that house tonight. Aaron's shoulders dropped a fraction. not defeat relief. The particular relief of someone who has been holding everything alone for so long that being told someone else will hold it for a moment is almost too much to absorb. "Where do we go?" she asked. "We have a place," Tank said. What he didn't say yet was that while they'd been in the hospital hallway getting the full story from Aaron, his phone had buzzed twice. The first buzz was from a contact in his phone listed only as V, a message that said, "Heard you picked up a situation." Briggs' name came up. "Be careful, that family runs 3 deep and the youngest brother is not the one to underestimate." The second buzz was from an unknown number. The message was 4 words. She should have paid. Tank had read both messages in the 30 seconds between Aaron saying Lennox Crow's name and Ridge pulling out his phone. He'd put his phone back in his pocket without saying anything about either one because there was an order to things. Harper first, Aaron second, then the full picture. Then the Briggs family would find out what it meant when you broke a child's arm to send a message, and the message got delivered to the wrong people. They filed back through the waiting room, all 5 of them, Tank, Ridge, Aaron, Cutter, and Harper, who reached up and took her mother's hand the second Aaron came close and didn't let go of it. They walked out through the hospital sliding doors into the evening air, which had dropped to something almost bearable, and Harper looked up at the sky, which was going orange and pink at the horizon, and she said, "Apropos of nothing, Mr. Tanga." Tank looked down at her. "Yeah, Biscuit gets scared at night if I'm not home." Tank considered this. "Who's Biscuit?" "My cat." "Where does he stay?" "At the house. He has food and water, but he doesn't like being alone." Tank looked at Cutter. Cutter looked at Ridge. Ridge looked at the sky like he was calculating something. "I'll swing by and get the cat," Ridge said. Harper looked at him with an expression that was 7 different things at once, most of them cautiously hopeful. "You will?" "I'll get the cat," Ridge said again in the tone of someone who has just committed to something and is only slightly regretting the speed at which it happened. Harper almost smiled. It was small and it was brief, and it was the first one Tank had seen on her face all day, and it hit him somewhere in the chest like a slow, quiet punch. The clubhouse was a converted warehouse on the south edge of Dust Haven, held for 11 years, set back from the road behind a chain-link fence with a gate that required a code. Tank got out first and opened the gate himself, stood there while Ridge pulled through and looked up and down the road in both directions before he let it close behind them. Nothing moved. The road was empty. The desert on both sides was dark and still. He closed the gate. Inside the clubhouse was warm and loud with exactly the kind of ordinary evening noise that made what Tank was about to say feel almost surreal. Somebody had the TV on. There were cards being played at the long table near the back. Somebody was arguing about something in the kitchen. Normal. Routine. The bones of a life lived together. That changed the moment Tank walked in. He didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to raise his voice or call a meeting or explain the small girl with the blue cast and the pale, tired woman walking behind her. The men in that room read the room the way men who've spent years reading rooms do, quickly, completely, and without being asked. Chairs scraped back. Cards went face down. The kitchen argument stopped mid-sentence. Priest, who was the chapter's sergeant-at-arms and had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved rather than grown, came across the room in 4 strides and looked at Tank with his eyebrows asking the question his mouth hadn't formed yet. "Briggs family," Tank said, and above them Lennox Crow. Priest's expression didn't change. That was telling. If the name was new to him, it would have shifted something. It didn't shift anything. "How deep are you in?" "We picked up a kid the Briggs boys worked over this afternoon. Intentional fracture arm. She's 8. The card players at the back table were very still now. Her mother's in debt to Briggs through a street loan that got flipped." Tank continued. "Morales is dirty on Crow's payroll." He looked around the room. "And someone's already texting my phone from an unknown number telling me they know everything." When did the text start? Priest asked. Hour ago, while we were still at the hospital. Morales. That's my read. Priest turned to a man named Daniels who was sitting at the far end of the table with a laptop open in front of him and who had already started typing before Tank finished the second sentence. Daniels was the closest thing the chapter had to an intelligence operation. He knew people who knew people. He had contacts in 3 state agencies, and he had a particular skill for finding the shape of something before you could see its edges clearly. Lennox Crow, Tank said to Daniels, Eastern Nevada, county-level reach. At least one law enforcement asset confirmed. Daniels nodded without looking up. Tank turned back to the room and found Harper watching him from where Erin had settled her into a chair near the wall. The girl's eyes were wide and moving from face to face around the room. Big men, leather vests, the general atmosphere of a space that had never been decorated with softness in mind. But she wasn't afraid. That was the thing. She was watching all of it with a kind of careful, assessing attention that was far too old for her face. You live here? Harper asked. Some of us, Tank said. It's loud. Yeah, I like it, she said simply. Erin put her hand on Harper's good shoulder. Her eyes found Tank over her daughter's head, and the question in them was the same one she'd been carrying since the hospital hallway. Now what? Tank crossed to them. He crouched down again, that same deliberate move getting to Harper's level, and he spoke to both of them at once. You're staying here tonight, both of you. There are rooms in the back that are clean and quiet, and nobody's getting through that gate without us knowing about it. I have a shift at 6 in the morning, Erin said. I'll call the diner. They'll fire me. They won't. You don't know my manager. No, Tank admitted, but he's going to hear from me tonight regardless. He held Erin's gaze. You're not going back out there until we know what we're dealing with. That is not negotiable. Erin looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and the nod was tired and grateful and terrified all at once, and Tank recognized every single one of those things because they were reasonable. He stood up and went to find Priest. They talked in the back hallway, away from the main room, voices low. Priest had already been on the phone. Tank could tell by the way he was moving the specific energy of someone who's just received information and is organizing it. Daniels pulled something, already, Priest said. Crow has a legitimate front construction company, 3 LLCs, a property management operation. Clean on paper. But there's a federal investigation that went quiet about 18 months ago. Wire fraud, extortion, at the federal level. And it went quiet very suddenly, which means either Crow bought his way out or he turned someone, or both. Or both, Tank said. Or both, Priest agreed. The Briggs family. Raymond's got 2 prior arrests, both dropped. His brother Dale's father, there's a Wade Briggs and a Cole Briggs. Wade is inside at Ely right now, 3 years in on an assault charge. Cole is the one to watch. Priest paused. Cole Briggs has no record at all, which means either he's clean or he's smart, and nobody who knows the family thinks he's clean. Tank leaned against the wall, the text, traced to a burner, bought in Pahrump 6 weeks ago. Cash. We know that much. 6 weeks ago, Tank turned that over. They weren't watching us specifically. They had the burner ready for this kind of situation generally, which means it's protocol. Crow's operation has a protocol for when someone interferes with collection, Priest said. We're not just someone who interfered with collection. Priest looked at him with the particular steadiness of a man who understood exactly what Tank meant and had been thinking about it himself. No, he said, we're not. They stood there a moment in the hallway, both of them running through the same calculations from different angles, arriving at the same place. How many can you pull together by morning? Tank asked. 7, 8 if Reyes drives up from Vegas. Call Reyes. Priest already had his phone out. Tank went back to the main room and stopped in the doorway when he saw what was happening. Cutter was at the long table across from Harper, and they were playing cards. Not a serious game, something simple, something Harper had apparently explained to Cutter because she was the one dealing and explaining the rules with the careful authority of a child who takes rules seriously. Cutter was holding his cards with both hands and frowning at them like they'd personally offended him, which was exactly the kind of expression that made Harper let out a small sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Ridge was in the kitchen getting coffee. Aaron was beside him, and Ridge was talking, not about anything important. Tank could tell by the rhythm of it, just talking, filling the air with something manageable and ordinary, so Aaron could stand in a kitchen and hold a coffee cup without having to think for 30 consecutive seconds about Raymond Briggs. Daniels appeared at Tank's shoulder, got more. They moved to the corner. Daniels had his laptop tucked under his arm, and he opened it on the nearest flat surface and talked fast and low. Lennox Crow, 61 years old. All right, Bunna. Born Elko County, started small protection rackets in the 90s, graduated to loan operations, moved into property and construction as a front around 2008. Current net assessed value of visible assets just under 4 million. Actual operation best estimate runs closer to 30. Daniels paused. He has a daughter, lives in Henderson. Legitimate life, has no idea what her father does or she's chosen not to look. He scrolled down. He also has a fixer, a man named Gerald Mace who handles the kind of problems that can't be handled with a burner phone and a threatening text. And the connection to Morales. Morales has been sheriff for 9 years. His campaign was funded in part by a PAC that traces back through 2 shell companies to one of Crow's LLCs. Daniels looked up. He's owned. How well known is this in the county? Known enough that nobody talks about it. Tank straightened up. In his chest, something had settled. The same thing that always settled when chaos became information, when fear became a map. He didn't feel better exactly. He felt focused, which was different. Focus was a tool. He was picking it up. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Unknown number. Same one. This time just one word. Tonight. Tank stared at it. Then he looked up and across the room at Harper, who had apparently just won the card game because she was holding her cards up in her good hand, and Cutter was doing a performance of theatrical defeat that was completely out of character for him and was working perfectly. Tank walked over to Priest. We need eyes on the perimeter, right now. They just sent another message. What did it say? Tonight. Priest was on the radio before the word finished landing. What happened in the next 20 minutes was the clubhouse shifting from an evening into something else, entirely, quietly, efficiently, without panic. Because these were men who knew the difference between urgency and chaos and had long since chosen to live on the side of urgency. 2 men took the east fence. 1 took the gate. Daniels killed the exterior lights and switched to the cameras. Ridge came out of the kitchen with his jaw set and his eyes asking, and Tank told him in 6 words, and Ridge went immediately to his bag in the back room. Aaron appeared in the kitchen doorway, coffee still in hand, reading the shift in the room the same way Tank had read it in her face at the hospital, completely without missing it. They know where we are, she said. It wasn't a question. We don't know that yet, Tank said. But you think they do? He didn't lie to her. It's possible, which is why we're making sure. Aaron set the coffee down very carefully on the nearest surface. I should have left Dust Haven when Briggs first came to the diner, she said. I knew it then. I knew it in my stomach, and I told myself I couldn't afford to. And now she stopped. Her eyes went to Harper, still at the table with Cutter. Now she has a broken arm, and we're in a biker clubhouse at night because there's nowhere safer. The second part of that sentence is true, Tank said. Lean on it. She looked at him. You're very sure of yourself. No, he said honestly. I'm sure of the people around me. There's a difference. At 11:43, Daniels called out from across the room in a voice that was controlled and quiet and landed like a stone in still water. Camera 2, east fence. We got a vehicle. Every head in the room turned. Park, Daniels said, eyes on his screen, lights off, sat for 40 seconds and then moved. Make and color. Dark pickup. Can't get plates from this angle. Tank crossed to the camera feed in 6 steps and looked at the screen. The vehicle was already gone from the frame, just taillights shrinking into the dark at the edge of the road. They're running a surveillance pass, Priest said from beside him. First one or the last one, Tank asked. Priest said nothing because the answer to that question was in the timing. 11:43 at night after 3 threatening texts after a burner phone purchased 6 weeks ago as protocol, and the answer was not the first one. Tank's phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time 3 words. We know everything. He read it twice. Put the phone in his pocket. The motel 6 miles east was the kind of place that didn't ask questions because the business model depended on not asking questions. Single-story 16 units ice machine at the end that rattled every 4 minutes whether anyone was near it or not. A night clerk behind glass who looked up when Tank came through the door at 2:47 in the morning and clocked everything about him in less than a second and decided correctly that cooperation was the sensible position. Gerald Mace, Tank said. What room? The night clerk looked at the 4 men standing in his lobby, Tank, Priest, Ridge, Vargas, and said 9 before he'd consciously made the decision to say it. They walked the exterior corridor without running. Running announces itself. Walking at a certain pace with a certain weight says something different. It says we are not in a hurry because we do not need to be, which is its own kind of message. Tank knocked on the door of room 9. 2 knocks. Deliberate. A pause. Movement inside. Then a voice guarded and roughened by either sleep or cigarettes or both. Who is it? Someone Lennox Crow didn't tell you to expect, Tank said. The silence on the other side of that door was exactly 8 seconds long. Tank counted them. Then the door opened. Gerald Mace was mid-50s, thick through the chest and shoulders in the way that used to be muscle, and had softened only slightly at the edges. He had the eyes of someone who assessed threats for a living. They moved across Tank and then the others in a single sweep, calculating filing sighting. He was in jeans and a t-shirt. He'd been awake. You're the biker, Mace said. I'm one of them, Tank said. Can we come in? Do I have a choice? You have the kind of choice that's easier to make when you think about it for 3 seconds. Mace thought about it. Then he stepped back from the door. The room was neat in the functional way of someone who doesn't attach to spaces. A bag packed and standing by the wall, a laptop open on the table, 2 phones on the nightstand, a coffee maker that had been used recently. Mace sat on the edge of the bed. Tank took the chair by the table. Ridge and Vargas stayed near the door. Priest stood in the center of the room with his arms loose at his sides, which was for Priest the position of maximum readiness. We know who you are, Tank said. Gerald Mace. We know who you work for. We know you checked in 2 days ago, which means you were here before the Briggs boys put their hands on that little girl. Which means you knew what was planned and when. Mace's face gave nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. That's the wrong answer for this conversation, Tank said. Let me explain why. Right now, Lennox Crow thinks he has a debt collection situation that got complicated by some bikers who will back down when it gets serious enough. That's what he thinks. That's what you're here to make happen, get us to back off or remove the complication entirely, whichever's available. Tank leaned forward slightly. What Crow doesn't know yet is that we have documented connections between his operation and Sheriff Morales. We have a financial trail linking Crow's LLCs to Morales' campaign. We have your check-in date, which puts you in the county before a crime was committed against a child, a crime that is currently under investigation by the county hospital and has a mandatory report filed. He paused. And we have a contact at the FBI field office in Las Vegas who's been waiting 18 months for someone to hand them something they can actually use on Crow. That last part was 60% true and 40% pressure, but Mace didn't know which 60 and which 40, and the uncertainty was the point. Something moved behind Mace's eyes, barely visible, but there. What do you want? Mace said. I want you to call Crow right now in front of me and tell him to pull Raymond Briggs and his family off Erin Lee and her daughter permanently. The debt is gone. The pressure is gone. They don't exist to Briggs anymore. Mace stared at him. You understand what you're asking. I understand exactly what I'm asking. Crow doesn't cancel debts because someone asks him to. He'll cancel this one, Tank said, because the alternative is everything I just described landing on his doorstep before he has time to prepare for it. A federal investigation that went quiet doesn't stay quiet forever. It just needs a reason to wake up. He held Mace's gaze. We're the reason. Mace was quiet for 10 seconds. He was running calculations. Tank could see it the way a man looks when he's weighing not what he wants to do, but what he can afford to do. Mace was loyal to Crow the way people are loyal to the source of their income, which is a real loyalty, but a conditional one, and conditions had just changed significantly. I make this call, Mace said slowly. Crow's going to want to know how you found me. Tell him the truth. Tell him we're better at this than he assumed. Another pause. Mace picked up one of the phones from the nightstand, not the personal one, the second one. He looked at Tank one more time, the look of a man committing to a direction he's not certain about, and then he dialed. The call lasted 4 minutes. Tank heard one side of it, Mace's clipped, careful phrasing. The pauses where Crow was speaking, the way Mace's voice stayed neutral and professional, even as he delivered information that was clearly not what the person on the other end wanted to hear. At one point, Mace said, "No, I'm telling you, it's documented. Yes, all of it." And then near the end, quietly, "I'd take the deal, Lennox." He hung up, put the phone back on the nightstand, looked at Tank. He wants a face-to-face tomorrow, wants to hear the terms directly. Tank had not expected that. He kept his expression from showing it. Where? He'll send the location in the morning. Mace paused. And the Lee family in the meantime? He said they're off the board tonight. Mace paused. I believe him on that part. Crow's practical. He won't move on them while terms are being discussed. And after the meeting, Mace looked at him with something that might on a different face have been respect. That depends on what you bring to the table. They drove back toward the clubhouse in the dark, and for the first mile, nobody said anything. And then Priest said from the passenger seat, "You just agreed to sit across from Lennox Crow." I know. That's a different kind of problem than what we walked into today. I know that too. He's going to want something. Not just for the Lee family, for the disruption, for Mace, for the fact that we walked into his operation and made noise. I know what he's going to want, Tank said, and I know what I'm going to say to it. Priest looked at him, which is, I'll tell you when I've worked out the rest of it. Priest looked back at the road. You've got 5 hours. When they got back to the clubhouse, the first thing Tank noticed was that the light in the back hallway was on. The second thing he noticed was Cutter standing in the doorway to the back room with an expression that was not his usual expression. Something was wrong with it. Off-center, tighter than it should be for a man standing in a warm building at 3 a.m. What? Tank said. Cutter looked down the hallway toward the back room. Erin got a phone call about 40 minutes ago. Unknown number. Tank went still. What did they say? She won't tell me everything, but she's been sitting with Harper since the call, and she won't put the phone down. Cutter paused. She's scared in a different way now, not the same scared as before. Something changed. Tank went down the hallway and knocked twice on the door, soft. Erin's voice came through it, quiet and unsteady. Come in. She was on the small bed with Harper asleep across her lap, one hand on her daughter's back, the other holding her phone against her chest like she was trying to keep something inside it from getting out. Her face told him everything before she said a word. They called me, she said. Not Raymond, someone else, a man I didn't recognize. What did he say? Erin's hand tightened on the phone. He said that it didn't matter where I was, that they had someone watching the house, the diner, the school. Her voice broke on the last word, and she held it together through sheer force. He knew Harper's classroom number, Tank. He knew her teacher's name. Tank sat down on the edge of the bed. Did he make a demand? He said the debt was still live, that whatever deal was being worked out above his level wasn't his problem, that Raymond Briggs wanted his $9,200 by Friday or... She stopped. Her eyes went to Harper. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Raymond made the call independently, Tank said. More to himself than to Aaron. What does that mean? It means that Crow told Raymond to stand down tonight, and Raymond decided not to wait for the outcome of tomorrow's meeting. Tank stood up. It means Raymond Briggs is operating outside of what Crow authorized. He stepped back into the hallway and closed the door quietly. Cutter was right there. Raymond went rogue, Tank said flatly. He made a threat call to Aaron after Crow agreed to a ceasefire. He's not waiting. Cutter said nothing for 2 seconds. So we have a meeting with Crow tomorrow and a loose wire named Raymond running his own play tonight. Yes. And if Raymond moves before the meeting, he won't get the chance, Tank said. Tank. He won't get the chance, Tank repeated, because we're going to find Raymond Briggs right now tonight, and we're going to have a conversation with him that he won't forget, and that will make very clear that the meeting tomorrow happens without any additional pressure on the Lee family. Cutter looked at him for a moment. Define conversation. The kind that doesn't require a lawyer. There was a pause. I'm coming. I know. Priest reappeared from the main room, reading the hallway the way he read everything. Raymond, he said, not a question. Called Aaron after Crow agreed to stand down, Tank said. He's freelancing. Priest absorbed that in about 1 second. Dress. Daniels, who had apparently followed Priest down the hallway because Daniels went wherever the information was needed, held up a piece of paper. Raymond Briggs, mobile home east of the county road just past the old grain co-op. It's in his brother Wade's name. He paused. It's 12 minutes from here. Tank looked at the paper. Then he looked up at the 3 men standing in the hallway. All of them waiting, all of them already pointed in the same direction. Down the hallway through the closed door, a child slept with the blue cast on a broken arm, and her mother sat beside her in the dark, holding a phone that still held the echo of a threat she hadn't deserved to receive. Tank folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Let's go, he said. The drive was 12 minutes and it felt like 2. Ridge pushed the speed and nobody told him not to. Vargas rode with them again and kept his eyes on the road ahead and said nothing, which was the right thing. Priest was on the phone to his contact in the county, not Morales. A different line, someone who owed Priest a consideration that went back 3 years and had never been called in until now. The call lasted 90 seconds. Priest hung up and said, we have 20 minutes before anyone official starts paying attention to this address. We'll be done in 10, Tank said. Raymond Briggs's mobile home had one light on inside visible through the window, which meant Raymond was awake, which meant the timing was exactly what it needed to be. Tank got out of the vehicle with Priest and walked to the door and knocked hard enough that the sound of it carried. A voice from inside irritated. Who the hell? Raymond Briggs Tank's voice was flat and clear. Open the door. A pause. The kind of pause that sounds like a gun being reached for. I wouldn't, Tank said through the door. I'm not alone, and this is already a conversation, not a confrontation. Open the door and it stays a conversation. 7 seconds, then the door opened. Raymond Briggs was 52 years old and looked like a man who had spent those years proving something to people who weren't watching. He was heavy in the shoulders, unshaven, wearing a flannel shirt open over a white undershirt. His eyes moved across Tank and Priest to the vehicle behind them and did the math quickly, and didn't like the answer. You called a woman tonight, Tank said, after your boss told you to stand down. You made a threat that included specific details about her child's school. Raymond's chin came up. I don't know what you're talking about. Raymond, Tank's voice stayed level. I drove 12 minutes at 3 in the morning because I am giving you one opportunity to hear this clearly before it becomes something neither of us can undo. So hear it clearly. He took a step closer. The debt is gone. Aaron Lee does not owe Crow, does not owe you, does not owe anyone. That is the outcome of tonight, whether you accept it or not. What you control is whether you accept it standing in your doorway or sitting in a county holding cell, explaining to a federal agent why your name is on a phone record associated with a call to the mother of a child whose fracture has been documented as intentional. Raymond stared at him. His jaw was working not with words, with the internal argument of a man who wants to be defiant and is calculating the cost of it in real time. You don't have the pull for that, Raymond said. But his voice was 3 degrees less certain than his words. Gerald Mace made a phone call to Lennox Crow 2 hours ago, Tank said. In that phone call, he told Crow that we have documentation connecting the operation to Morales. Crow agreed to a meeting tomorrow to discuss terms. He agreed to stand down on the Lee family tonight. He paused. You made a call anyway, which means right now you are not just in my crosshairs, Raymond. You're in Crow's. That landed. Tank watched it land the specific way Raymond's expression changed when he understood that he hadn't just pushed against an outside threat, he'd gone sideways on his own employer, and Lennox Crow was not a man who tolerated that. The defiance left Raymond's face like water leaving a broken cup. What replaced it was something smaller and more honest. I've got nothing if Crow cuts me loose, Raymond said. It wasn't an argument. It was the plain statement of a plain fact. That's not my problem, Tank said. But here's what I'll give you. If the Lee family is left alone from this moment forward completely permanently, no contact, no debt, no message in a kid's backpack, then your name stays out of what I take to the federal contact tomorrow. The call you made tonight stays between us. He held Raymond's eyes. That's the offer. It doesn't stay open past sunrise. Raymond looked at him for a long time. The light from inside the mobile home fell across half his face, and in that half light, he looked like what he was not a dangerous man, but a desperate one, which had always been a more unpredictable thing. Fine, Raymond said, one word, dry and stripped of everything. Say it clearly, Tank said. The woman and the girl are done. I'm out of it. Tank looked at him for 2 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back to the vehicle, and Priest fell in beside him, and they got in, and Ridge pulled away from the mobile home in the dark. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then Priest said quietly he'll hold, for tonight. You think he moves again after the meeting? Tank stared at the road. I think that depends on what Crow decides tomorrow. And I think tomorrow is the real thing. He leaned his head back. Raymond Briggs is a broken instrument. Lennox Crow is the hand that holds him, and tomorrow we sit across from the hand. Tomorrow, Tank said, we end this. The clubhouse was quiet when they returned. The perimeter watch was still in place. The camera feed showed nothing moving. In the back room, the light had gone out, which meant Erin had finally let herself fall into something that might be sleep or might just be the exhausted stillness that comes after fear reaches its limit. Tank sat back in the chair by the camera screens. He didn't try to sleep. He let the quiet of the building settle around him, the breathing of it, the weight of all the people inside it who were trusting the walls and the fence, and the men watching the fence to hold. He thought about Lennox Crow, about a meeting he hadn't planned for 48 hours ago, about everything Daniels had pulled together, and what it was worth as leverage, and where the edges of that leverage were. He thought about Harper saying okay in the voice of a child choosing to trust. He thought about what he owed that voice. At 4:41 in the morning, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, the same one from before. He looked at the screen. This time it wasn't a threat. It was an address. And below the address, a time. 10 in the morning. And below the time, 4 words that told Tank everything about what tomorrow was going to be. Come alone, no exceptions. Tank read the message 3 times. Then he put his phone face down on the table and sat with the silence of the clubhouse around him and thought about what it meant to walk into a room alone with Lennox Crow. Come alone, no exceptions. It was a power move. He understood that. Crow wanted Tank without backup, without witnesses, without the structural comfort of having men at his shoulder. Because a man alone in a room with Lennox Crow was a man who could be made to feel small, and a man who felt small either folded or made mistakes, and either outcome was useful. Crow had been running this kind of meeting for 30 years. He knew exactly what the conditions produced. What Crow didn't know was that Tank had sat alone in rooms with worse. At 6 in the morning, Priest came out of the back hallway looking like a man who'd slept in 20-minute intervals and made peace with it. He looked at Tank's face and then at the phone on the table. Message, Priest said. Address and time. Tank showed him the screen. Come alone. Priest read it, set the phone back down. You're not going alone. I am. Tank, listen to my... Tank turned to face him fully. If I show up with 4 men behind me, Crow cancels the meeting, and we've lost the one moment where we have more leverage than he does. Right now, he thinks he's the one holding the terms. He thinks this is him agreeing to hear us out. He hasn't absorbed yet that we're the ones with the documentation, with the federal connection, with Mace already rattled. He paused. I need him to feel in control long enough for me to take it from him. Priest looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that carries disagreement and trust in equal measure. The kind only possible between men who've known each other long enough to hold both at once. You'll have a wire, Priest said finally. It wasn't a question. Daniels can set it up and Vargas will be within 200 yards. Priest, those are my terms, Tank said. You go alone into the room, but Vargas is close and I'm listening. That's not negotiable and I will not move off it. Tank looked at him. Then he nodded once. Fine. Fine, Priest said, and went to find Daniels. At 7:15, Erin appeared from the bite hallway with Harper beside her, the blue cast bright against Harper's arm, in the morning light coming through the high windows. Harper was holding Biscuit Ridge had made good on his word. The cat retrieved from the house sometime around midnight, a gray striped tabby with the specific disdain of a creature that had been inconvenienced and intended for everyone to know it. Harper carried him against her chest with her good arm, and he tolerated it because she was the one person whose tolerance he apparently operated on. Erin looked at Tank across the room and read his face the way she'd been reading rooms her whole adult life quickly, without being wrong about it. Today's the meeting, she said. 10 o'clock with Crow. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Harper had gone to sit on the couch with the cat still operating in the particular bubble of childhood that allows a kid to be thoroughly absorbed in an animal while the adults around her navigate something enormous. Erin watched her daughter for a second, then looked back at Tank. What happens if he says no? Erin asked. What happens if Crow decides the leverage isn't enough and he walks away from the table? Tank had been sitting with that question since 4:41 in the morning. He turned it over from every angle available, and he kept arriving at the same answer, which was that the scenario didn't exist. Not because Crow wasn't capable of walking away, he was, but because the math didn't support it. A federal investigation reactivated a documented connection to a corrupt sheriff, a child's mandatory medical report creating a paper trail with his operation's fingerprints on it. Crow had built his empire and calculated risk, and this particular calculation didn't balance in his favor. He won't say no, Tank said. How can you be sure? Because I'm going in there prepared to give him something he wants in exchange for something I need, and the thing I'm giving him costs me more than it costs him. He met her eyes. That's how these things work. Erin looked at him steadily. What are you giving him? Tank was quiet for 2 seconds. Our word that what we have on him stays quiet as long as the Lee family stays untouched. We don't go to the federal contact. We don't hand over the documentation. We hold it as insurance, not as a weapon, as long as he holds his end. You're making a deal with him, Erin said. Not accusatory, just clear. I'm making the deal that keeps you and Harper safe for longer than tonight, Tank said. And I'm making it with documentation he knows I'll use if he breaks it. He paused. That's not a handshake agreement. That's a leash, and I'm the one holding it. Erin absorbed that. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she looked down at them briefly and then back up. And you trust that it holds? I trust that Crow is smart enough to know it has to hold. She nodded slowly. Then she said something Tank hadn't expected. Be careful. Not just strategically, actually careful. He's not going to be what you're ready for. What do you mean? I mean that Raymond Briggs is brutal because he's desperate and mean. Lennox Crow is different. He's polished. He makes you feel like you're the one being unreasonable. He makes you feel like you're the one creating the problem. She held Tank's gaze. Don't let him do that to you. Tank looked at her. A woman who'd been managing Crow's shadow for months while working diner shifts and raising a daughter alone and holding herself together with both hands had just given him the most useful intelligence briefing he'd heard since the night started. I won't, he said. The address Crow had sent was a property management office on the north end of the county, one of his legitimate fronts. A clean space public enough that nothing theatrical could happen, private enough that the conversation could be real. Tank pulled into the parking lot at 9:58 and sat in the truck for 90 seconds. In his ear, a nearly invisible piece of equipment connected him to Priest 2 miles back listening. Vargas was already parked within sight of the building's side exit. I'm going in, Tank said quietly. Priest's voice in his ear, we're here. Tank got out of the truck. The office was neat, air-conditioned, the kind of space designed to convey stability and legitimacy. Framed prints, a reception desk that was currently empty, a hallway leading to a back office whose door was open. A man Tank didn't recognize was standing near the hallway entrance and nodded once when Tank came in, gesturing toward the back. Not Mace, someone else, younger, patient, the specific stillness of a man whose job is to be ready and not to act unless told. Tank walked past him down the hallway and through the open door. Lennox Crow was 61 years old and looked like someone's grandfather if the grandfather had spent his life in rooms where decisions got made. He was sitting behind a desk that had nothing on it except a glass of water and a folder, and he was wearing a collared shirt, and his hair was gray and neat. And when Tank came through the door, he looked up with an expression of complete and easy composure. That was the most dangerous thing Tank had seen in 24 hours, because it was entirely real. Sit down, Crow said, not aggressively, almost warmly, like they were old acquaintances catching up. Tank sat. You've had quite a night, Crow said. Productive, Tank said. The corner of Crow's mouth moved. Gerald tells me you're thorough. I appreciate thorough. Impulsive, I can't work with. Thorough, I respect. He folded his hands on the desk. You understand what you've walked into. I understand it clearly. Then you understand that I've been operating in this county for 19 years without significant interference, which means the people who've tried have either reconsidered or regretted it. He said it without heat, without threat, just as a fact stated among facts. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that as a warning to you. I'm saying it as context so you understand that my agreeing to this conversation is not routine. I understand that, Tank said, and I appreciate it. Crow nodded. He opened the folder. Inside, Tank caught a glimpse of printed pages and recognized some of what was there. The documentation Daniels had assembled. Crow's people had their own version. He'd had it prepared before Tank walked in. You have a federal contact, Crow said. Yes, and you have documentation connecting my operation to Sheriff Morales' campaign funding. Yes, and you have Gerald's check-in date and what it implies about the timing of the Briggs collection escalation. Yes, Crow looked at him steadily. So what do you want? Erin Lee's debt is dissolved. Complete. She owes nothing to you to Briggs to any entity connected to your operation. No contact, no surveillance, no indirect pressure. She and her daughter live their lives in this county without your shadow on them. And in exchange, what we have stays in a drawer, Tank said. It doesn't go to the FBI field office. It doesn't find its way to a journalist. It doesn't get filed anywhere. It exists as a record held by people I trust, reviewed annually. If the Lee family remains untouched, the record remains private indefinitely. Crow was quiet. He looked at Tank with those steady, easy eyes, and Tank heard Aaron's voice in the back of his mind. He makes you feel like you're the one being unreasonable. And he sat with it and didn't move. You're asking me to absorb a loss, Crow said finally. I'm asking you to categorize $4,000 as a cost of doing business in exchange for 19 more years of nobody looking at you from the outside. Tank paused. That's not a loss. That's the cheapest insurance you've ever bought. A silence opened up between them. It lasted long enough to have weight. Then Lennox Crow made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. Raymond went sideways on me last night, Crow said. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement offered with the precision of someone who understood that the credibility of the deal depended on honesty at this particular moment. I know, Tank said. He called the woman after I told him to stand down. I know that too. I spoke to Raymond at 3 this morning. Crow's composure held, but something behind it registered. You spoke to him. We had a conversation. He understood the situation, and Raymond agreed to stand down. He did. Crow looked at Tank with a new quality of attention, the look of a man recalibrating, updating filing. You moved on 3 fronts in one night. Gerald Raymond, and you're sitting here now. He paused. You're not just a biker who picked up a lost kid. No, Tank said simply. I'm not. Crow closed the folder. He picked up the glass of water, took one sip, set it down precisely where it had been. The Lee family is off the board. Permanently. I'll clean up the Morales situation on my end to reduce the exposure. He looked up. The record you're holding stays in the drawer. As long as they're untouched. As long as they're untouched, Crow repeated. They looked at each other across the clean desk, and in that look was everything that wasn't being said. The understanding that this was a balance, and not a piece, that both men were holding something over the other, and both knew it, that the agreement worked precisely because it was mutual and fragile, and neither party could afford for it to break. We're done here, Crow said. Tank stood up. He walked back down the hallway past the silent man near the entrance and out through the front door into the Nevada morning, which was already bright and hot and indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. He got in the truck. He sat for a moment. Talk to me, Priest said in his ear. It's done, Tank said. A pause. Done clean. Done clean. He heard Priest exhale. It was a small sound, controlled, but it was the exhale of a man who'd been holding his breath for hours. Tank pulled out of the parking lot and drove back toward Dust Haven, toward the clubhouse, toward Harper, and her blue cast and her cat and Aaron with her folded hands and her diner shifts, and Cutter, who'd played cards all evening with a child he'd known for 6 hours with the full seriousness the game deserved. He called the clubhouse from the road. Cutter picked up on the second ring. Tell Aaron it's over, Tank said. A pause on the line. Then in the background, a sound, not words, not a full sentence, just the sound of a woman receiving news that something terrible has finally stopped being true. It was brief and honest, and it traveled through the phone and hit Tank somewhere deep and quiet. She says thank you, Cutter said. His voice was rougher than usual. Tell her she doesn't need to. When Tank walked back through the clubhouse door 20 minutes later, Harper was standing in the middle of the room with Biscuit over her good shoulder, like a furry scarf, and she looked at Tank when he came in with those careful, assessing eyes, and she said, Did you fix it? Tank looked at her for a moment. This child who'd walked out of the brush on broken legs, who'd protected her mother's name before she protected herself, who'd chosen to trust 3 strangers with patches on their backs, because she had no other choice, and because somewhere underneath the fear, she'd read them correctly. Yeah, he said, I fixed it. Harper looked at him for another second. Then she nodded the nod of someone who'd asked a serious question and received a serious answer and accepted it completely. Good, she said. Then she went back to the couch with the cat. Erin was in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Tank and he looked at her, and she pressed her lips together and nodded once, and he nodded back, and that was enough. It was exactly enough. No more or less than the moment required. 3 days later, Erin went back to her shift at the diner. Harper's arm was checked at a follow-up appointment, where Dr. Reyes confirmed the cast was set properly and noted with visible relief that the child seemed against all reasonable expectation okay. Not undamaged. That was a longer road, but present, functional, held. Caleb arrived on the third day. He was Erin's brother, 39 years old, who'd been living in Phoenix and had gotten a call from Erin 2 days earlier. The call she'd finally let herself make, the one she'd been putting off because making it meant admitting how bad things had gotten. Caleb drove straight through from Phoenix without stopping. And when he walked into the diner where Erin was on shift and she saw him through the pass-through window, she had to put down what she was carrying and step into the back and hold herself together for 60 seconds before she could come out and greet him. Caleb came to the clubhouse that evening. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that was different from Cutter's quiet. Softer, more searching. The quiet of someone who'd spent years wishing he'd stayed closer and had just been given a vivid demonstration of why that wish had been right. He shook Tank's hand with both of his and held on for a moment longer than a handshake usually went. "I owe you something I don't have words for," Caleb said. "You don't owe us anything," Tank said. "Take care of them. That's the whole thing." "I'm staying," Caleb said. "I'm not going back to Phoenix. I'm done being 5 hours away." He said it with the simplicity of a man who'd made a decision that was going to cost him things and had made it anyway. "I figured Dust Haven needs a decent mechanic." "It does actually," Ridge said from across the room without looking up. Harper heard the conversation from the couch and came over and looked up at her uncle with her blue cast and her cat, and said, "You're really staying." Caleb crouched down in front of her the same way Tank had crouched on that first afternoon, getting to her level, making himself smaller so she felt bigger. "Yeah, Bug, I'm really staying." Harper thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "You can sleep on the couch until you find a place." Caleb's face did something complicated. "Thanks, Bug." She nodded seriously and went back to the cat. That night, after Erin and Harper and Caleb had gone back to the house, the actual house, because the threat had a shape now, and the shape was manageable, and Erin had decided that living in fear of a door was not living, the clubhouse settled into its natural late evening rhythm. Cards, the television, someone arguing in the kitchen. Ridge was reading something on his phone. Cutter was cleaning his bike in the back, methodical and quiet. Tank sat in the same chair he'd sat in through the long night, the chair by the camera feeds. Except tonight the feeds showed nothing of interest. Just the fence, the gate, the road, the ordinary dark of a Nevada evening. Priest sat down beside him. He didn't bring coffee this time. He just sat. For a while, neither of them said anything. The sounds of the clubhouse moved around them, and the night sat still outside the fence. And somewhere in Dust Haven, a woman and her daughter were home with a cat named Biscuit and an uncle who'd driven through the night to be where he should have been all along. "You think Crow holds Priest?" asked eventually. "For now," Tank said. "Long enough to matter. And after." He paused. "After is after. We stay ready." Priest nodded. The nod of a man who understood that some victories don't come with trumpets or finality. They come with the quiet fact of a child sleeping safely in her own room, which is the most ordinary miracle available to the world. And also on the right night, the only one that counts. Tank looked at the camera feed showing the empty road outside the gate, and he thought about the moment Harper had fallen out of the brush that afternoon. How the whole day had been ordinary until it wasn't. How 3 men with tools in their hands and grease on their knuckles had been doing nothing important until suddenly they were doing the only important thing. He thought about what it cost to show up for something like that and what it cost not to. And he thought that of all the things the club had been in 11 years, the good and the bad, And everything in between tonight was the version of it he'd carry longest. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A number he recognized. Aaron's. A text. No words, just a photograph. Harper in her bed. The blue cast visible. The gray cat curled into the curve of her knees. She was asleep. Deeply, completely asleep. The real kind, the safe kind. The kind that only comes when the body finally believes the threat is gone. Tank looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he put his phone in his pocket and sat back in his chair, and the clubhouse breathed around him warm and loud and alive. And outside the gate, the Nevada desert ran on in every direction toward a horizon that looked in the dark like it went on forever. Some fights choose you. That's the truth of it. You're standing at a gas station in the heat of an ordinary afternoon, and something falls out of the brush, and you kneel down and everything changes. You don't decide to be the person who stays. You just find out that you already are. Tank had found out that afternoon, so had Cutter, so had Ridge. And what they'd found was not a surprise. It was a confirmation, quiet and complete, of what the loyalty had always been for. Not for the patches, not for the road, not even for each other. For this. For the moments when an ordinary day stops being ordinary and someone needs the fence held. For the promise made to a small, broken girl who looked at a man twice her height and chose to trust him because she had no other option and because he was worth it. As long as you need us, Tank had said it to Harper later when she'd asked with a child's directness whether they would stay. And he'd meant it the way you mean the things you don't say lightly, the things you say when you know they'll be held and measured and returned to in harder moments. The things you say because they're simply irrevocably true. In Dust Haven, Nevada, on a night when everything that needed to be held was finally held, the promise stood. And nobody, not Raymond Briggs, not Gerald Mace, not Lennox Crow with his clean desk and his steady eyes and his 19 years of shadow, was going to be the thing that broke it. Tank sat in that chair by the camera feeds and let the weight of what had happened settle into his bones. 15 years ago in Columbus, Ohio, he'd watched his mother sit at a kitchen table with a split lip and blackened eye, too afraid to go anywhere because the man who'd put her there had connections, and she had nothing. Tank had been 19, full of rage and empty of power, and he'd sworn that he would never be that helpless again. And then 2 weeks later, she was gone. Heart attack, the coroner said. But Tank knew better. He knew what stress did to a body, knew what living in fear cost, knew that sometimes people die from wounds that never show on the surface. He'd left Ohio that same month, drifted west, found the club, found a family that understood that loyalty wasn't just words, it was action. It was showing up when it mattered. And today, for the first time in 15 years, Tank had been able to do what he couldn't do for his mother. He'd been able to stand between a terrified woman and the thing that wanted to break her. He'd been able to say no to power that thought it was untouchable. He'd been able to keep the promise he'd made to himself over his mother's grave. The photograph of Harper sleeping was still on his phone. He looked at it one more time. The cast, the cat, the piece on her face. Yeah, he thought, this one's for you, Mom. Priest was still sitting beside him. Neither of them had spoken in 5 minutes. You good, Priest asked quietly. Tank nodded. Yeah, I'm good. It's not over, Priest said. You know that, right? Crow's going to be watching us. Morales, too. This is a truce, not a surrender. I know. And Raymond's still out there, still desperate, still dangerous. Tank turned to look at him. I know all of that. But tonight, Harper sleeps safe. Tomorrow we'll deal with tomorrow. Priest accepted that with a nod. Across the room, Cutter emerged from the back where he'd been working on his bike. His hands were clean now, the grease washed off. He walked over to where Tank and Priest were sitting and stood there for a moment, not saying anything. Then he said, I called my ex-wife. While you were at the meeting. Tank looked up at him. Yeah, asked if I could see Lily this weekend. Cutter's jaw worked. She said yes. That's good, man. That's real good. Cutter nodded. Been thinking about what you said, about showing up, about being the person who stays. He paused. I haven't been that for Lily, but I'm going to be, starting this weekend. Tank stood up and put a hand on Cutter's shoulder. She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Cutter said quietly. He glanced toward the back room where Harper had slept earlier. Seeing that kid tonight, the way she looked at you, the way she trusted you, made me realize what I've been missing, what I've been too scared to fight for. It's not too late, Tank said. No, Cutter agreed, it's not. Ridge wandered over, drawn by the gravity of the conversation. What did I miss? Cutter's seeing his daughter this weekend, Priest said. Ridge's face split into a rare grin. About damn time, brother. About damn time. They stood there together, the four of them in the warm light of the clubhouse. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear. Inside, something had shifted. Something had been settled. Tank thought about Crow's words. You're not just a biker who picked up a lost kid. No, he thought. We're not. We're men who chose to stand in the gap, who chose to be the wall between the helpless and the harm, who chose to be worth the trust a scared little girl placed in us. And that choice, made over and over again in 1,000 small moments, was what made them who they were. Not the leather, not the bikes, not the patches or the reputation. The choice to show up, the choice to stay, the choice to keep promises that cost something to keep. Daniels came out of his corner laptop under his arm. Got something you should see, he said to Tank. Tank followed him to the table. Daniels opened the laptop and pulled up a news article. Sheriff Morales announced his resignation tonight, Daniels said. Effective immediately, citing health reasons. Tank read the article. The language was carefully neutral, but the timing was obvious. Crow moves fast, Tank said. He's cleaning house, Daniels agreed. Getting rid of the obvious connections, making himself harder to touch. Good, Tank said. Let him. As long as Aaron and Harper are off his radar, I don't care how he runs his empire. There's more, Daniels said. He pulled up another screen. Wade Briggs Raymond's brother, the one who's been in Elahi. He was released on parole this afternoon, 6 months early. Tank went very still. That's Crow, too. Has to be, Daniels said. He's sending Raymond a message, giving him back his brother, keeping him loyal. Or buying his silence, Priest said, reading over Tank's shoulder. Either way, Tank said it means Crow's keeping the deal. He's tidying up loose ends, making sure nothing traces back to him, making sure Raymond doesn't have a reason to go rogue again. It's smart, Ridge said, ruthless but smart. Tank closed the laptop. Keep monitoring it. I want to know if anything changes. Any sign that Crow's moving on Aaron, any hint that the agreement's fracturing. You'll know the second I know, Daniels promised. The night deepened. One by one, the men drifted off to their rooms or their bikes or wherever they went when the adrenaline faded and the ordinary rhythms of life reasserted themselves. Tank remained in the chair by the camera feeds, not because he didn't trust the perimeter watch, not because he expected trouble, but because some vigils you keep because they matter. Some watches you stand because standing them is its own kind of promise. Harper was asleep in a house 3 miles away, safe behind a door that no one was going to kick in. Aaron was beside her, finally able to close her eyes without jumping at every sound. Caleb was on the couch, keeping his own watch, being the family he should have been all along. And here in this converted warehouse full of rough men and loud bikes and the accumulated weight of a dozen years of brotherhood, Tank kept his watch too. Not because the fight was over. It wasn't. It never really is. But because today, this one day they'd won. They'd stood between a child and the people who wanted to break her. They'd said no to power and made it stick. And tomorrow, when the sun came up over the Nevada desert and the heat pressed down and the world spun on in its endless, complicated way, they would get up and do it again. Because some men run from the past, and some men let the past teach them how to stand. Tank had stopped running 15 years ago, and every day since he'd been learning how to stand. Today he'd stood for Harper, for Aaron, for every person who'd ever been cornered and afraid and out of options. And tomorrow he'd stand again, as long as he was needed, as long as there were people who needed someone to hold the line. His phone buzzed one more time, a text from Aaron, just 3 words. "Thank you for everything." Tank looked at the message for a long moment, then he typed back, "Sleep well, you're safe." He put the phone down and looked at the camera feeds one more time. The fence, the gate, the empty road stretching into darkness. Somewhere out there, Lennox Crow was in his clean office, making his clean moves, running his empire, with the ruthless efficiency that had kept him untouchable for 19 years. Somewhere out there, Raymond Briggs was nursing his wounds and his resentments, dangerous because desperation makes men dangerous. Somewhere out there, the world was exactly as complicated and broken and brutal as it had always been. But here in Dust Haven, Nevada, in a small house with a cat named Biscuit and a blue cast on a healing arm, a little girl slept without nightmares. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.